They called them in one by one old acquaintances, former rivals, people who once tried to dismantle you, people who once believed they understood the rules of your existence, as if you were something that could be mapped, measured, predicted. They sat across from each other with rehearsed confidence, certain they still had the upper hand, certain the story they told themselves years ago was still true. But the moment your name surfaced again, something subtle shifted. Not fear, not panic, just hesitation. The kind that appears when certainty starts to crack, the kind that shows up when memory doesn't line up with reality anymore. Because they remembered you as someone else, someone quieter than they expected, someone who didn't react the way pressure demands, someone who didn't fight when provoked, didn't scramble when cornered, didn't perform when watched. Back then, they mistook that for weakness. They mistook restraint for confusion. They mistook composure for passivity. They didn't realize they were misreading the entire situation. You were never playing defense. You were never trying to win. You were watching, listening, noticing patterns they didn't even know they were revealing. While they relied on volume, on posture, on exaggeration, you relied on awareness. And awareness doesn't age, it sharpens. So when they were asked to speak about you now, years later, their stories didn't land the way they expected. There were gaps, contradictions, moments where their confidence stalled mid-sentence, because the version of you they described no longer made sense, not compared to the one standing quietly in the background of the present. They expected confrontation. They expected resistance. They expected you to defend yourself, to clarify, to argue, to correct the record. That's how these things usually go. Noise answering noise. Ego meeting ego, but you didn't move. You didn't interrupt. You didn't explain. You didn't rush to reshape the narrative they were fumbling to maintain. You let them talk. You let them overextend. You let them repeat themselves, contradict themselves, embellish details that no longer held weight. And slowly, without you doing anything at all, people began to notice, not what was being said, but how it was being said. The tightening jaw, the sudden defensiveness, the way small questions triggered oversized reactions, the way calm inquiry was met with emotional urgency, the way facts blurred the louder the speaker became. Observers started comparing tone to truth, posture to credibility, reaction to reality, and that's when the shift really began. Because while others were still trying to control the story, you were simply existing inside it, steady, consistent, unchanged. Your presence didn't demand agreement. It didn't push for validation. It didn't need to convince anyone of anything. It just stayed coherent. And coherence is unsettling to people who survive on distortion. They kept expecting you to crack, to flinch, to match their intensity. They assumed silence meant pressure was working. That restraint meant you were cornered. That composure meant you were calculating an escape. They didn't understand that silence was never your shield. It was your mirror. The more they spoke, the clearer it became who was still reacting to the past and who had already moved beyond it. You weren't frozen. You weren't avoiding. You weren't stuck. You were settled and settled. People don't rush to be understood. They trust that understanding arrives on its own timeline. That's what confused them most, because the old strategies stopped working. Provocation didn't provoke. Accusations didn't escalate. Exaggeration didn't trigger correction. The more they tried to pull you into the old dynamic, the more obvious it became that you were no longer there. You had outgrown the framework they were still operating inside. So the pressure shifted direction instead of pushing against you. It started collapsing inward. People began asking quieter questions, not out loud at first, internally. Why does this feel off? Why does the reaction seem bigger than the issue? Why does the calm one feel more credible than the loud one? They started watching patterns instead of statements, consistency instead of claims, behavior instead of branding, and every time they did, you came out intact. You didn't need to correct the narrative because it was correcting itself. Each exaggeration made the truth sharper by contrast. Each overreaction carved more space around your steadiness. Each attempt to define you revealed more about the person doing the defining. They didn't realize they were auditing themselves. You weren't immune to pressure because you were powerful. You were immune because you were aligned. Your words matched your actions. Your pace matched your values. Your silence matched your awareness. Nothing about you was fragmented, and fragmentation always shows under scrutiny. They kept circling back to old stories, hoping repetition would restore authority. But repetition without substance only amplifies emptiness. The more they tried to resurrect past versions of you, the more it became clear those versions no longer existed. You hadn't evolved loudly. You hadn't announced anything. You hadn't rebranded or reinvented yourself for approval. You had simply continued. And continuation, done quietly, is one of the most destabilizing things to people who rely on interruption and chaos. Observers began defending you without realizing they were doing it. Not passionately, not aggressively, just with small, grounded observations. That doesn't match what I've seen. That feels exaggerated. Their reactions seem disproportionate. Simple statements, calm questions, and each one landed heavier than any argument ever could. Because they weren't defending you. They were defending coherence. You never asked for support. You never rallied anyone to your side. You never framed yourself as misunderstood or wronged. You didn't need to. Integrity attracts protection without requesting it. The people who once tried to dismantle you started recalibrating their tone. Some softened, some went quiet, some doubled down and lost credibility in real time. Others avoided eye contact altogether, suddenly aware that the room had changed orientation, not around them. Around you, and you still hadn't moved. That's the part they couldn't accept. That nothing dramatic was required. That no confrontation was necessary. That no explanation was demanded. That no defense was staged. Awareness had done the work. Your calm wasn't strategic. It was natural. The result of having nothing to hide. Nothing to prove, nothing to protect. You weren't guarding an image. You were grounded in yourself, and grounded people don't need to win narratives. They let narratives exhaust themselves. So as the conversation stretched on, as the pressure kept trying to find a place to land, it became obvious there was nowhere for it to go. You weren't absorbing it, you weren't reflecting it, you weren't amplifying it. You were neutral. And neutrality, when paired with clarity, becomes an invisible boundary. No manipulation can cross. They began to sense it, that they couldn't reach you the way they once thought they could. That the old levers no longer worked. That whatever version of you they had constructed in their minds had quietly dissolved. You weren't resisting them. You were simply no longer available for distortion. And that realization hadn't fully settled yet. It was still forming, still uncomfortable, still unfinished. The room hadn't reached its conclusion, but something irreversible had begun. The realization didn't arrive all at once. It crept in through pauses, through the moments where conversation stalled and no one rushed to fill the silence, through the way eyes lingered on you a second longer than necessary. As if people were recalculating something they had taken for granted. Because once doubt enters a constructed story, it doesn't leave quietly. They started noticing how often the narrative about you relied on emotion instead of evidence. How frequently it leaned on interpretation instead of observation. How many details changed depending on who was telling it and who was listening. At first, they brushed that off. Everyone tells stories differently. Everyone remembers selectively. But then they compared notes, and the inconsistencies stacked up. Meanwhile, you remained exactly the same. Same tone, same pace, same restraint, same refusal to perform. You didn't sharpen your words to sound convincing. You didn't soften your posture to look harmless. You didn't adjust yourself for the room. You let the room adjust to you. That's when the dynamic quietly inverted. The pressure that was meant to weigh on you began pressing outward. Instead, people who once felt comfortable accusing started feeling exposed. Not because you challenged them, but because clarity has a way of illuminating excess. The louder they became, the more disproportionate it looked beside your composure. The more urgency they displayed, the more unnecessary it felt. They were trying to control perception. You were letting perception breathe. And breathing space changes everything. Observers began trusting their own senses again. Not what they were told to think, but what they could actually see. They noticed how you listened fully before responding. How you didn't twist words or dramatize moments. How your version of events never needed embellishment. It was consistent. And consistency, over time, becomes undeniable. You didn't present yourself as flawless. You didn't claim innocence or perfection. You didn't position yourself as a victim or a hero. You simply remained accurate. You acknowledged complexity without feeding chaos. You held nuance without collapsing into defensiveness. That alone set you apart. Because people who manipulate narratives depend on extremes, on absolutes, on urgency, on forcing others to pick sides before thinking. You gave no such pressure. You allowed people to arrive at their own conclusions. And when people feel free to think, truth tends to surface. The ones who had built their identity around opposing you felt it first. They became their certainty frayed. They began repeating themselves more often, as if volume could replace substance. They interrupted more, deflected more, explained more than anyone asked them to. That's when observers started leaning back instead of in. Because over-explanation is rarely a sign of confidence. You watched it all unfold without satisfaction, without resentment, without commentary. Not because you didn't notice the shift, but because you didn't need to react to it. Reaction would have tethered you to the very dynamic that was dissolving. You stayed unattached, and detachment, when rooted in self-trust, is profoundly disarming. Some people tried a different approach. Softer tones, strategic humility, reframed accusations disguised as concern. But even those attempts collapsed under the same weight. Because authenticity isn't just about words. It's about timing, coherence, and restraint. You weren't adjusting your story to fit the moment. You were living inside one continuous line of truth, and people felt that. They began defending you without defending you. Not with loyalty, not with allegiance, but with observation. Simple remarks, calm clarifications. That doesn't align with what I've seen. That feels exaggerated. The response seems bigger than the behavior. No one needed to rally. No one needed to argue. The environment itself was recalibrating, because when clarity enters a space, chaos becomes obvious without being attacked. Those who once believed they controlled the room felt it slipping, not dramatically, subtly, like losing grip on something they didn't realize they were holding too tightly. Their influence waned not because you replaced it, but because it no longer made sense. You weren't offering an alternative narrative, you were offering reality. And reality doesn't compete, it persists. As time passed, the urgency faded. The accusations lost momentum, the emotional spikes flattened out. People stopped bringing your name up as a focal point and started referencing it as context, not as a threat. not as a problem, as a constant. That's when respect began to emerge, not admiration, not praise, but recognition. Recognition that you couldn't be moved by pressure. Recognition that you couldn't be baited into distortion. Recognition that you didn't need to control perception to remain intact. You hadn't won anything. You had simply stayed whole, and wholeness is incredibly difficult to undermine. Those who once underestimated you realized the cost of that misjudgment. Not because you punished them, not because you corrected them publicly, but because they were now forced to carry the awareness of having been wrong. And awareness is heavier than blame. You left the situation unchanged externally, yet nothing felt the same afterward. Conversations had a different tone. Assumptions were made more carefully. Accusations were tempered. People listened longer before speaking. The room learned something. That restraint is what sealed it. Because anyone can argue. Anyone can defend. Anyone can react. Very few can remain coherent while being misrepresented. Very few can allow truth to surface without rushing it. You did, and the narrative collapsed, not with noise, not with confrontation, not with exposure, but with exhaustion. It ran out of energy because it had nothing real left to feed on. All that remained was clarity, and you were still standing inside it, unchanged, grounded, unbothered, as the story finally reached the point where it could no longer continue the way it began. By the time the dust settled, no announcement was made. There was no moment of public reckoning, no dramatic reversal, no loud acknowledgement of what had really happened. And that was the point. Truth rarely needs a stage. It only needs time. People began treating the past version of the story like something outdated, something that no longer fit the facts in front of them, not because anyone instructed them to, but because holding on to it started to feel uncomfortable. It required too much justification, too many mental adjustments, too much ignoring of what was now obvious. You didn't step forward to claim vindication. You didn't revisit old moments to prove anything. You didn't remind anyone of what they once believed. You let the silence do what it does best, separate what's real from what was exaggerated. And in that silence, something settled. Those who once felt confident speaking over you grew quieter, not out of shame, but out of recalibration. They realized that certainty built on assumption is fragile, that confidence fueled by reaction doesn't last. That composure, when sustained, carries its own authority. You became a reference point without becoming a topic. People measured behavior against you without saying your name. They paused before exaggerating. They hesitated before aligning with emotion over evidence. Not because they feared consequence, but because they had learned something through observation. They had seen what happens when consistency meets time. What surprised them most wasn't that the narrative fell apart. It was how little effort it took on your part. You didn't dismantle it. You didn't counter it. You didn't engage with it long enough to give it shape. You simply refused to become distorted by it. And distortion needs participation to survive. Your calm didn't just protect you. It exposed the imbalance around you. It made overreaction visible. It made manipulation obvious. It made performance stand out as performance. Without you saying a word, some people will never admit they misjudged you. They'll rewrite the story quietly in their own minds, convincing themselves they always saw things clearly. And that's fine. Recognition doesn't need confession to be real. Others will remember the shift more honestly the moment they realized something didn't add up. The moment they noticed your steadiness while everything else fluctuated, the moment they trusted their own observation instead of someone else's interpretation. That's where real correction happens, not through confrontation, not through exposure, through awareness. You didn't become louder to be heard. You became clearer, and clarity has a way of carrying further than noise ever could. Now, when your presence enters a space, it doesn't stir reaction. It brings a kind of quiet recalibration. Conversations become more precise. Assumptions soften, people listen a little longer, not because you demand it, but because your presence sets a tone that doesn't invite chaos. You didn't gain influence, you revealed it. And you did it by staying aligned with yourself when misalignment was encouraged, by staying accurate when exaggeration was rewarded, by staying grounded when reaction would have been easier. That's not strategy, that's integrity. The story that once surrounded you no longer has a center. It can't attach, it can't grow, it can't provoke, because there's nothing in you for it to grip. You're not carrying resentment forward. You're not carrying the past with you. You're not waiting for validation. You're moving on with a steadiness that doesn't need acknowledgement. And that's the part most people don't talk about. The aftermath, the quiet shift where nothing dramatic happens, but everything feels different, where trust reforms slowly, where perception matures, where people learn without being taught how to separate truth from performance. You didn't just outlast the noise, you outgrew it. And now whatever comes next meets a version of you that has already proven something important, not to others, but to yourself. That you don't need to fight narratives to survive them, that you don't need to explain truth for it to stand. That calm, when sustained, becomes undeniable. This isn't a victory, it's a return to balance. You remain composed. You remain consistent. You remain intact. And the world, quietly and without ceremony, adjusts around that.
Oh, there you are. Not louder, not angrier, not begging for your side to be heard. Just different. And that's what scares them. No comeback, no closure, just results. You didn't write a paragraph. You didn't gather receipts. You didn't stand in the courtroom of public opinion, waving evidence like a desperate saint, trying to prove you're not the devil. You let them talk. You let them build their little mythology about you. You let them cast you as the villain in stories they invented, and then you disappeared into the dark. That's the part they don't understand. Because normal people defend themselves. Normal people crave understanding. Normal people itch for validation like addicts scratching at their own skin. But you chose silence. Not weakness, silence, weaponized silence. You became the ghost in the room, the unsolved case, the unsent message, the call that never came back, and they hated it. Do you know why? Because when you don't defend yourself, you force them to sit alone with their own narrative, and narratives rot without opposition. They get exaggerated, twisted, dramatic, delusional. They needed you to argue so they could anchor their lies to your emotion, but you gave them nothing. Nothing but progress. Nothing but elevation. Nothing but results. And that's when the real panic started. Because it's easy to hate someone who's struggling. Easy to dismiss someone who's loud. Easy to mock someone who's still explaining themselves. But someone who says nothing and then wins. That's terrifying. You became the paradox, the saint who looks like a psychopath, the angel who walks like a demon, the villain in their mouths and the hero in your own story. And they can't reconcile that. See, when you didn't clap back, they assumed you were broken. When you didn't defend your name, they assumed guilt. When you didn't fight for closure, they assumed you'd lost. But what you were really doing was evolving. Pain did something to you. It didn't soften you. It sharpened you. Every rumor, fuel, every betrayal, blueprint. Every night you sat there replaying the disrespect in your head. Training montage. You were becoming unpredictable, and unpredictability, oh, that's power. They thought they knew your script. They thought you'd cry, rage, explain, beg, try to fix the misunderstanding. Instead, you went quiet and built something they couldn't see. And when it surfaced, it wasn't revenge. It was transformation. You didn't return with words. You returned with status, with discipline, with a presence so composed it made their accusations look childish. And suddenly, you were the villain. Isn't that delicious? You hurt no one. You attacked no one. You exposed no secrets. You simply improved. And that alone made them uncomfortable, because your growth invalidated their narrative. If you were truly unstable, if you were truly incompetent, if you were truly the problem, then how are you thriving? How are you glowing? How are you ascending? How are you unbothered? Their story required you to stay small. You didn't. So now they rewrite history. Now you're cold. Now you're calculated. Now you never cared. Now you're fake. No, darling. You just stopped bleeding publicly. And that's when they realized something horrifying. They can't control you anymore. You see, closure is a leash. Arguments are chains. Explanations are permissions. The moment you refused to give them that, you snapped the collar off your neck. And free people are dangerous, because you're no longer reacting. You're responding selectively, strategically, or not at all. You learned that attention is currency, and you stopped donating yours to people who were bankrupt in character. That's the duality they can't process. You're calm, but not weak. Silent, but not submissive. Forgiving, but not forgetful. Kind, but capable of cutting someone out like a tumor without anesthesia. You became the angel with a blade behind your back, not because you enjoyed darkness, but because darkness trained you. Pain refined you. Humiliation burned away your need for applause. And once applause doesn't control you, you're unstoppable. That's why they rage watch you now. They scroll your page with clenched jaws. They monitor your wins like detectives trying to find fraud. They whisper your name in rooms you're not in. Because the scariest thing in the world isn't someone who fights back. It's someone who transcends. You didn't clap back. You leveled up. You didn't demand closure. You closed the chapter alone. You didn't chase understanding. You became undeniable. And now they're left holding a story that doesn't make sense anymore. In their version, you were supposed to collapse. Instead, you constructed. In their version, you were supposed to spiral. Instead, you ascended. In their version, you were the villain. But villains don't build empires quietly. Villains don't discipline themselves in the dark. Villains don't turn betrayal into strategy, unless the villain was never evil, just underestimated. That's the twist, isn't it? You let them believe you were the monster, because monsters don't get questioned. Monsters don't get pitied. Monsters get left alone. And alone is where you grow teeth. You became comfortable being misunderstood. That's a superpower most people will never develop, because they are addicted to being seen correctly. You are addicted to becoming unstoppable. So let them talk. Let them invent. Let them dramatize your silence like it's some crime scene documentary. While they're narrating fiction, you're engineering reality. And here's the part that really makes their skin crawl. You don't hate them. You don't even think about them much anymore. They're fighting a version of you that no longer exists. You evolved past the argument, past the apology, past the need to prove anything. That's what transformation looks like from the outside. It looks like arrogance. It looks like coldness. It looks like ego. But from the inside, it feels like peace. A peace forged in fire. A peace that says, I know who I am, and I don't owe you a debate about it. And that is cocaine-level power. Because once you stop defending your identity, you start defining your destiny. No comeback, no closure, just results. And suddenly you're the villain in stories they invented. Good. Let them write horror stories about you. Meanwhile, you write history. Keep that silence sharp. Keep that focus lethal. Keep that duality alive. Be the saint who doesn't explain. Be the demon who doesn't chase. Be the light that learned how to survive the dark. Because the moment you stopped arguing, you started winning. And the scariest part, you're just getting started. You can feel it, can't you? That shift in the air when you walk into a room now. It's subtle, but it's there. Conversations pause half a second too long. Eyes scan you differently. Smiles stretch thin like plastic over envy. They don't know whether to clap for you or warn others about you because you broke the script. You were supposed to defend yourself. You were supposed to fight for understanding. You were supposed to plead your case like some tragic hero, desperate to be seen as good. But you did something far more disturbing. You accepted being misunderstood. That's when you crossed over. See, the moment you no longer fear being seen as the villain, you become uncontrollable. They can't bait you with accusations anymore. They can't manipulate you with guilt. They can't threaten you with rumors, because you already survived the worst version of their imagination, and you didn't die. You adapted. That's the part they didn't calculate. They thought isolation would weaken you. They thought silence would suffocate you. They thought exile would humble you. But exile is where empires are designed. Alone is where you confronted yourself without applause, without distraction, without external validation, whispering sweet lies in your ear. You met your shadow there, and instead of running from it, you shook its hand. That's what makes you dangerous now. You're not pretending to be pure. You're not performing morality for an audience. You know you're capable of darkness. You know you could retaliate. You know you could expose. You know you could destroy reputations if you wanted to. But you don't. Not because you can't. Because you've evolved past reaction. That restraint, that composure, that calculated stillness. It terrifies people more than rage ever could. Rage is predictable. Silence with a plan is not. They search your face for cracks. They listen for bitterness in your tone. They wait for the meltdown they promised everyone would come. And you deny them that satisfaction. You smile, you build, you expand, you glow. And they feel stupid. Because they invested so much emotional energy into a narrative where you crumble. Now they have to explain why the villain looks so composed, why the problem is prospering, why the toxic one seems healed. That contradiction fries their brain. So they double down. They call you cold. They call you fake. They say you've changed. Of course you changed. Pain demands evolution. You can't walk through fire and expect to smell like roses. You walked through humiliation, through betrayal, through nights where your chest felt like it was collapsing inward, and instead of exploding outward, you imploded strategically. You rebuilt quietly, brick by brick, habit by habit, thought by thought. You stopped reacting emotionally. You started observing strategically. You studied yourself, your triggers, your weaknesses, your insecurities, your patterns. You turned self-awareness into a weapon. Now when someone tries to provoke you, you see the strings before they even pull them. Now when someone tries to rewrite your character, you let them, because you know something they don't. Reputation is noise. Results are reality. Noise fades. Reality compounds. That's why you didn't chase closure. Closure is for people who need the other side to cooperate in their healing. You healed without permission. You forgave without apology. You moved forward without consensus. And that level of independence, it makes people feel irrelevant. They hate that. They hate realizing they no longer have emotional access to you. Once upon a time, they could press a button and you'd react. Now, the buttons don't work. They press harder. Still nothing. And that silence echoes in their chest like a verdict. You are no longer available for emotional manipulation. You are no longer auditioning for approval. You are no longer negotiating your worth. That's the transformation. Not louder, not crueler, not arrogant, just untouchable. And here's the twisted beauty of it. The more they paint you as the villain, the freer you become. Because villains don't have to be liked. Villains don't have to please everyone. Villains don't have to over-explain. Once they give you that label, they unintentionally remove the leash of expectation. You're no longer trying to fit their definition of good. You're defining your own code. And that code is simple. Peace over drama. Discipline over impulse. Power over performance. Growth over gossip. You became allergic to chaos. And chaos can feel when it's no longer welcome. That's why some people drifted away. Not because you hurt them, but because you stopped entertaining dysfunction. You stopped engaging in circular arguments. You stopped defending obvious truths. You stopped begging to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding you. That's when your energy changed. It became focused, condensed, sharp. There's something about a person who doesn't need to talk about their next move. Something about a person who doesn't announce their healing. Something about a person who doesn't argue their innocence. It creates mystery, and mystery breeds power. Now when they look at you, they don't see the old version anymore. They see someone controlled, measured, strategic, and it unsettles them because unpredictability is dominance. If they can't predict your emotional response, if they can't bait you into reaction, if they can't corner you into explanation, they lose leverage. And without leverage, they have no influence. That's the true win. Not revenge, not applause, not validation. Control over yourself. Self-mastery is terrifying to those who rely on chaos to feel powerful. You became stable. You became centered. You became aware. And awareness is lethal. You can sense intention before it's spoken. You can feel envy behind compliments. You can detect manipulation in tone shifts. You don't confront it. You catalog it. You adjust accordingly. That's evolution. They're still playing checkers. You're playing psychological chess. And the best part, you don't even hate them. You've outgrown the need. Hatred ties you to the past. Indifference liberates you. Now when they tell stories about you, you almost smile, because the version they're describing, that person doesn't exist anymore. You buried them. You buried the insecure one, the reactive one, the desperate to be understood one. In their place stands someone forged, someone who understands that not every battle requires a sword. Some battles require silence. Some victories require distance. Some power requires disappearing long enough to rebuild in private. And when you return, you don't return with noise. You return with results. And that's why they panic. Because results can't be debated. Results can't be gaslit. Results can't be rewritten. They stand there, solid, undeniable. Proof that you didn't need their approval to ascend. So let them keep their stories. Let them cling to their version of you. While they narrate fiction, you accumulate reality. And deep down, they know. They know the truth. You didn't lose. You didn't collapse. You didn't break. You transformed. And transformation without explanation feels like betrayal to those who wanted you small. But you were never meant to stay small. You were meant to evolve through pain, to weaponize silence, to master unpredictability, to become so grounded in your identity that no accusation can shake it. No comeback, no closure, just results. And every day you wake up calmer, sharper, more detached from chaos. You realize something intoxicating. Being misunderstood is a small price to pay for being unstoppable. And here's the part they will never admit out loud. They miss the old you. Not because the old you was better, but because the old you was accessible. The old you explained. The old you reacted. The old you cared too much about being perceived correctly. That version was easy to handle, predictable, emotional, negotiable. But this version calculates. This version listens more than it speaks. This version doesn't jump to defend its name. It lets time choke out the lies on its own. And time, oh, time is ruthless. Time exposes inconsistencies. Time reveals patterns. Time shows who stayed bitter and who built something. While they were replaying your offenses, you were rehearsing your discipline. While they were building group chat narratives, you were building habits. While they were diagnosing your character, you were redesigning your future. That's the difference. They processed pain through gossip. You processed pain through growth. And growth is quiet. It doesn't scream. It doesn't announce. It compounds, day after day, choice after choice, silence after silence, until one day you wake up and realize you're no longer emotionally available for chaos. That's when it hits you. You don't need to win arguments anymore. You need to win days. And you've been stacking them. That's why your energy feels different now. It's not loud confidence. It's contained power. The kind that doesn't flex. The kind that doesn't threaten. The kind that doesn't explain. Just observes, moves, executes. There's something deeply unsettling about a person who refuses to argue their worth. Because arguments imply doubt, and you don't doubt yourself anymore. Not in the way you used to. You've seen your own darkness. You've witnessed your own pettiness, your own insecurity, your own craving for validation. You've owned it. And when you own your shadow, no one else can weaponize it against you. That's psychological immunity. Now, when someone accuses you of being cold, you don't flinch. You know, warmth is reserved for those who don't try to burn you. When someone says you've changed, you nod. Of course you did. Stagnation is death. When someone calls you distant, you almost laugh. Distance is what saved you. See, they confuse boundaries with cruelty. They confuse silence with guilt. They confuse evolution with arrogance. Because staying the same would have made them comfortable. But you didn't choose comfort. You chose transformation. And transformation is violent. Not outwardly, inwardly. It rips apart old beliefs. It dismantles old habits. It kills old versions of you. You had to let parts of yourself die. The overly forgiving one, the over-explaining one, the overextending one. You buried them without ceremony, no funeral, no announcement, no dramatic goodbye, just quiet resolve. And from that burial ground, something colder emerged. Not heartless, focused, not cruel, selective, not detached from reality, detached from dysfunction. You learned the difference between compassion and self-betrayal. You stopped sacrificing your peace to maintain someone else's comfort. That's when they started calling you the villain. Because villains don't tolerate disrespect. Villains don't overextend. Villains don't apologize for protecting their energy. But here's the paradox. The more they demonize you, the clearer you see them. Projection becomes obvious. You notice how their stories about you reveal more about their insecurities than your behavior. You notice how they need you to be unstable so they can feel stable. They need you to be wrong so they can feel right. They need you to be dramatic so they can feel justified. But your composure ruins that. Your discipline dismantles that. Your results invalidate that. And nothing triggers fragile egos like invalidation. So they escalate, they exaggerate, they rewrite history with more intensity. Because deep down, they feel you slipping beyond their reach. You are no longer emotionally tethered to their approval. And that loss of control terrifies them. You can sense it in the way they monitor you, in the way they casually bring up your name, in the way they pretend not to care while gathering updates. It's not admiration, it's surveillance. But you don't panic. You don't perform. You don't react. You let them watch. Because being watched while winning is far more satisfying than being understood while losing. You've stepped into a different mindset now. You don't chase closure. You create outcomes. You don't seek validation. You build evidence. You don't argue narratives. You outgrow them. That's why you sleep differently now. Not perfectly, but peacefully. Because your energy isn't scattered across pointless battles. It's concentrated, directed, intentional. And intentional people are dangerous. Not because they harm others, but because they cannot be easily manipulated. You've become aware of emotional traps, guilt bait, victim reversals, subtle gaslighting, performative apologies. You see them before they land, and instead of reacting, you detach. That detachment is mistaken for cruelty, but it's clarity. You finally understand that not every misunderstanding needs correction. Not every rumor needs response. Not every opinion needs validation. Sometimes the strongest move is strategic indifference. And indifference is the final stage of healing. You're not fueled by anger anymore. You're fueled by standards, higher discipline, higher focus. You've accepted that some people will only understand you at the level of their perception. And if their perception is small, that's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is growth. Your responsibility is self-mastery. Your responsibility is protecting your peace like it's sacred currency, because it is. And here's the truth that hits hardest. You didn't become colder. You became harder to access. Access is earned now. Trust is evaluated. Energy is reciprocated or removed. No dramatic exits. No explosive endings. Just quiet recalibration. That's maturity. That's power. That's evolution through pain. You were once the person who would fight to clear your name. Now you're the person who lets your consistency clear it for you. You were once the person who needed closure to move forward. Now you move forward without permission. You were once the person who feared being misunderstood. Now you understand yourself so deeply that misunderstanding doesn't threaten you. That's growth, and growth without explanation looks suspicious to those who stayed the same. Let them suspect. Let them speculate. Let them script you into their cautionary tales. Because while they narrate, you navigate. While they dramatize, you strategize. While they talk, you execute. No comeback, no closure, just results. And every result is another silent answer to a question you refuse to argue about. You don't need the last word anymore. You need the last move. And you've learned how to make it without warning. That's the thrill. That's the dominance. That's the intoxicating realization that you no longer need to defend who you are. You simply embody it. And embodiment cannot be debated. It can only be witnessed or feared.